Hello, this is the Circularity Catalyst podcast, where regenerative thinking meets real-world strategy. I'm your host, Ken Alston. Hello, this is Ken Alston with another edition of the Circularity Catalyst podcast. And today in the studio, we have an amazing guest, Allison Reser. Welcome, Allison. Allison is the Director of Sustainability and Innovation for the Pet Sustainability Coalition. Well, welcome, Allison. I'm really happy that we were able to make this happen today. So for listeners who are not yet familiar with you and the Pet Sustainability Coalition, can you share a bit about who you are, the role you play, and what the coalition exists to do within the sustainability landscape?
Well, Ken, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. And yes, so I'm Allison Reser, as you said. And with the Pet Sustainability Coalition, we have a vision of a sustainable future where every choice for pets supports a thriving planet. I love that vision. It's kind of hot off the press. We revised it in January, but what that means to me is that we are a coalition working towards basically a pet product environment where if you are a pet owner, you don't have to do this mental calculation of, I really want to be sustainable, but I don't know what products are and aren't. It's just everything on the shelf is not coming at the cost of the planet. It's a pretty lofty vision. So our mission, how we get there, is to advance sustainability in the pet industry through collaboration, education, and innovation. We focus a lot of our work on members, which are companies all across the pet product supply chain and all over the world. And we're able to support them with kind of individual company progress, as well as bringing those companies together so that we can create industry change, because of course one company can't create change in a whole industry. We're tackling some big problems.
Right, yes, I know that very well. I started the Sustainable Packaging Coalition many moons ago, and we had Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola amongst the members who started it off, and there was that realization that no matter how big a company you are, even the soda giants, they can't solve all these problems on their own. And so the idea of the coalition, sensible then, and it's still sensible now. So I do resonate with what you were saying. Tell us a little bit about you, the role you play specifically. And I think as we chatted before I hit the record button here, say a little bit about how you got to work in this domain, because some people like to think about they might go in this direction for their career, but don't really know where to start.
Sure. My story is sort of that I figured out from a pretty early age that this was a career option. I was maybe in middle school and I had, and still have, an aunt. She worked for the EPA. And so I got to shadow her and I was like, oh, great. Like, there's a career of people who are trying to do something good for the environment. Let me please do that. So in undergrad, my degree was called Ecosystem Science and Sustainability. I found a master's program called Sustainability Management. And so I latched onto that word, sustainability, and it has followed me through many job titles and many company names as well as degrees. So I have bopped around to a few different jobs. I've worked at for-profit, at nonprofit, and most recently I found my way back to nonprofit, in part because I really wanted to live in Colorado, which is where PSC is based out of, and that's where I'm originally from. So it fit with my lifestyle, and I really believe in PSC's mission. It's a really fun space to be able to combine a love of cats and dogs and our pets that bring so much joy with a desire to have those pets and bring that joy in a more sustainable and environmentally friendly way. So specifically in my role, we're a pretty small team. There's 11 of us at PSC. I manage the team that does projects and consulting work directly with our members, as well as the team that manages our accreditation program, which is kind of like the program that sets apart our members that are going above and beyond for sustainability.
So from where you sit right now in snowy Colorado, what are some of the biggest difficulties and tensions that are facing the companies in the pet industry, obviously specifically, when it comes to sustainability? It's obviously a big word. It's a word we can talk about as well in a minute about what it might mean. What's challenging right now?
What I'm about to say is such a huge challenge. It's funny or hilarious because I just think that there are so many forces, very powerful forces that perpetuate business as usual practices. And unfortunately, many of those business as usual practices are extractive and they are exploitative. And some of those forces that perpetuate it are capitalism. Some of those forces are just convenience and habits. And it is just so hard to think about making change in a meaningful way. So I think that that's not unique to the pet industry. That is just a problem that we face as humanity that is quite large. But the little piece of the pet industry too is that with the systems that we're working with, budget is super important. The pet industry was having a great time in 2020. There was a lot of people spending money on their pets through COVID. And so sustainability work was really able to be prioritized by the pet industry. People were wanting it, people had money to spend, the industry was flush with cash. But now we're in a very different economic time where sustainability budgets are getting cut. So people are trying to figure out how to do the same meaningful work with less budget. And that's just a huge challenge. So we talk a lot about the business case for sustainability. We talk a lot about risk and how there's a cost of inaction for some of these things. So that's how we're trying to face those big challenges.
How do you, yeah, it's a good answer. How do you frame sustainability? I don't mean define it in like a one line sentence, because that's futile in my view. And please, if anybody's listening and you try to ask that question in any, I don't, because you'll get the wrong answer. But that having been said, what do you prioritize in sustainability in the pet industry? Is there something that's most top of mind that most people do? You know, obviously different companies have different, slightly different focuses and priorities.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you asked because the word sustainability, even though I love it, I find it very inspiring, it almost means so much that it means nothing without a definition. And so, as a small side note, we always encourage companies to go through a materiality assessment or a similar project to figure out like what are the sustainability topics that are much more specific that are relevant to them. So in general, or most commonly, how I would define sustainability or define those focus areas are in packaging and in ingredients. I have to say packaging because consumers really, really care about packaging. People really want to be able to recycle pet food bags. They usually cannot because it's flexible film. So that's one area of focus is just like sustainable packaging, meaning recyclable packaging or making it of recycled content, something like that. However, from the data that we've seen time and time again, what's in the bag, especially for pet food, matters more than the bag itself. The ingredients and the sourcing are probably like 70% of a product's overall environmental footprint, but it's a little out of sight, out of mind for pet owners because it's like your dog's got to eat the food. The dog eats the food, it goes away. So it's less tangible for them, but it matters a lot. So we're talking a lot about regenerative agriculture and the opportunity for upcycled ingredients or really leveraging animal byproducts in pet food ingredients, that kind of thing.
It's interesting that you picked on the two things, packaging and the product, to answer the question, because just a few days ago, I was going through a storage unit that I have and trying to declutter it somewhat. I found a copy of Corporate Environmental Strategy going back to 1999, where I co-authored an article with someone from an offshoot of the Environmental Defense Fund, the Alliance for Environmental Innovation. And it was all about partners in new product development. And it talked about the work that we did together collaboratively on, guess what, product and packaging. Mm-hmm. And we came up with 10 indicators for each as a way of, doing early assessments that answer exactly the question that you were talking about. Here we are 27 years later, and the topics haven't changed very much.
In some ways, I find that kind of reassuring that it's like we're talking about, or like we have many of the same categories or strategies as before, because it means that like we have the solutions. Like the problem is not that we don't know what to do. We know what to do it. We've actually known it for some time. The challenge is just like actually implementing it and innovating and really doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend all day talking about sustainability and definitions,
Hmm.
which at one level is futile, but another is really super important. And so I don't, I'm not dissing what you said about sustainability,
Right.
but there's such a lot of misinformation that, as you say, it risks the word being trivialized
Hmm.
when it's still the most important word. And I, for one, will not be changing away from it. But, when you look at sustainability and you go back to the old fashioned dictionary, right? And you ask, what is sustainability? And I've done, hour long speeches on this in industry. Surprised a lot of people. Sustainability is the ability to sustain something that's unstated what it is, right? That you're sustaining over some period of time that's also unstated. So immediately, two better questions are: what are you trying to sustain, and for how long?
Hmm.
And that's not a bad starting point, right? And if anybody's listening who thinks that sustainability is the ability to is the definition from the Brundtland Commission report from 1987, please disavow yourself of that thought, because that's the definition of sustainable development, which is sustainability applied to development. It's not sustainability itself. So
Right.
sometimes these things seem a bit semantic or pedantic, but they're not. They're actually uh, clarifying questions. Where do these pressures inside the business show up most visibly? What things do they react to? Think, oh yeah, I see that in my business.
You're talking
Is
about
it
like
the risk area?
the pressures that sustain like business as usual stuff, or pressures to be better.
The pressures that make them see that sustainability is something they have to deal with,
Mm.
or unsustainability is
Right.
what they have to deal with.
Right. There's a mix of pressures, and I think they're on somewhat of a spectrum of totally voluntary and totally mandatory. I actually have the pleasure of working with a lot of company leaders that are on this totally voluntary side of things. They understand that their position as a business leader is a powerful one, and they can make business decisions and have like real tangible change. They just like they get it. They get the importance of protecting resources and not damaging environmental resources and just caring for the planet. So they get it and they'll build it into their business. And so helping them is just about like making the budget work and all of that. On the totally mandatory side, there are plenty of laws around the world, both for climate reporting, for packaging, that make companies take it seriously. A lot of that is about like data gathering, and some of them hold companies accountable to actually improving on that data for something like greenhouse gas emissions. And I think there's some like kind of intermediate pressures as well. Along the supply chain, the different players kind of pressure each other. We see a lot of the retailers asking their vendors for certain data to contribute to their scope 3 emissions goals, or sometimes the other way around. There's a lot of like data flowing and pressures in the supply chain, as well as from investors.
How do you deal with the fact that there are, and I'm going to use harsh terms, but I don't mean it harshly. I mean, in all of these situations, when you're working with a community of companies as a coalition like that, you've got leaders and laggards, right? And you were talking about those who are truly stepping up and being leaders and know their position is of leadership. And there are others who are more in the compliance mode. How do you end up in a situation where even the laggards move forward?
Mm.
Are they being pulled by the leaders, or are they being pushed by regulation?
Yeah. We talk about that a lot as far as like lifting the floor versus lifting the ceiling.
Right.
And I think we are trying to do both. We often talk about it as a maturity curve, and we
Mm.
make it very clear that it's like we are an inclusive membership, that like you don't need to have passed some sort of sustainability test to join PSC as a member, because like you have to start somewhere. So progress over perfection is something that we talk about a lot. As far as like how your question about like how do we actually move those companies or encourage movement along that maturity curve, I think we hope that our accreditation program or other certification programs or like mechanisms of rewarding that kind of progress can actually create positive change. I think there is a certain amount of momentum that is created just from the warm, fuzzy feelings of being part of a coalition. Like just today, I led one of our cohort meetings, which is a group of members, a small group of members. We get together every year, and it's discussion based, and it's just about sharing resources and accelerating knowledge. Like that kind of thing, you see like the little inspiration light bulbs go off, and just the feelings of not being alone and tackling challenges together, I think inherently pushes both the laggards and the leaders along their journey. It's inspiring.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of this work starts with awareness building, which I think that is part of, and then it has to transition into the behavior change. Um, what's one thing that you wish people really understood about sustainability in the pet sector, but they don't yet?
Yeah. I think there is a lot of pet owners that don't think about the environmental impact of their pet. And actually, I was one of these people. I have a cat and I've made sustainability my career, but it wasn't until I found out about PSC about 2 years ago that I was like, oh my gosh, my cat, like, I haven't really been paying attention to what I'm feeding her. So it's almost, I think it's a blind spot, even for people who have this like serious value of sustainability or living their lifestyle that way. So I think part of it is just like I wish that all pet owners, I would like to invite them all into thinking about the opportunities for their pet. But then at the same token, I don't want people to feel bad about having a pet. There's kind of this like push pull of like, well, the most sustainable thing would be to not have a pet at all. But I do think there's something like inherently human about just like surrounding yourself with things that bring you joy. Like that's why I have a cat. She's just like she brings me so much joy. She makes me feel like I am able to give her compassion and am more of a compassionate person. Like just our relationship with animals is innately human. So my call to action is to like keep your pets, love your pets, and think about how your product choices might also contribute to sustainability and voting with your dollar for those companies.
Yeah, I certainly don't go with the guilt way of dealing with it. You're a bad person. You're unsustainable. Your cat's unsustainable. I mean, no. To me, that's going to turn more people off than turn them on.
Yeah.
What's something that either you or the organization has learned the hard way by just grinding and doing the work, right? That something that perhaps you wish you'd known earlier, but you had to go through
Mm.
a process of some sort to come out the other end and know it now.
I would actually like to answer that on the personal side. In my own career, I consider myself a generalist, meaning that based on my experience, I know a lot of different things, but potentially not super in-depth knowledge of any of those things. That has really helped me in my career to be able to kind of like connect the dots and understand systems thinking and all of that. But I do what I wish I had known or what I wish I had considered earlier, just like some of the trade offs of being a generalist versus a specialist, because being a specialist comes with a whole other host of benefits. It's like you really know your stuff, be it supply chain or emissions or risk or something like that. Sometimes I wonder, like, wow, what if I just knew everything about a sustainable supply chain? That'd be so cool. So that's just like a small thing.
It's an interesting tension, and I'm glad you brought it up because I trained as a chemist, so you could say I'm a specialist, right? In that, I've been in the sustainability arena with businesses for pretty much all my career, now approaching 40 years, which is a shocking thing to even say out loud. But I respect both equally and at the same time, simultaneously. Because in this work, ultimately, you have to ladder out and be a generalist and see the big picture. And
Mhm.
that's what you're doing. You're giving people this full scope. But then you do zoom into a supply chain and you do zoom into a product or a packaging. So you're in this system of flux, so zooming in and zooming out all the time. And a generalist can do that, and a specialist doesn't always do that. They tend to be very deep in their specialism. And so, as a consultant, I will never know the depth of how any one individual company does what it does. Their domain, if they're making cars or microphones or lighting, or, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
that's their domain. I will never be a specialist in that domain.
Yeah.
But I know how to ask better questions than they do in the sustainability domain.
Right.
And so I think there's nothing wrong with being a generalist. I think that's probably your superhuman strength,
Yeah,
or if you're going to be Wonder Woman or whatever, you're
generalist. Yes. This is like maybe this is silly, but I bike commute to and from work, and it's dark when I bike home now because it's winter. And I crafted a metaphor on my bike ride last night about the same concept, about like situationally being able to be a generalist or a specialist. And it came about because there's a section of my bike ride that is on this kind of like single track dirt path, but then most of my bike ride is on a bike lane in a street. And my bike light is kind of broad and sweeping. And when I'm on the street, that's great because I want the like full view of what's coming at me. But when I switch to the single track, I always wish that I had more of a pointed bike
yes,
light so I could
more
see the like
directional.
rocks and
Yeah,
stuff.
yes, yeah, more focused. Yeah.
And I feel like there's a good metaphor in there
No,
somewhere.
it sounds like a wonderful metaphor. Yes, your bike ride is both, and not one or the other. It's both. Yeah.
Right.
And that's why some of the frameworks that I've developed, I've developed a three-dimensional framework for sustainability to replace the old one that I think has failed miserably over 40 years. The old flat two-dimensional people, planet, profit, to
Mhm.
me is meaningless. The planet will take care of itself.
Right.
Life may not, life on Earth may not, but the planet will still be here, irrespective.
Yeah.
When you do your work, what's something that happens behind the scenes
Mhm.
that people don't really see? It could be the pet owners, or it could be the your companies within the coalition. Something that they never really get to see that you sort of wish they could.
Yeah. Um, what comes to mind is for our members, so the companies that we work with, I wish that they could see how much we all really care about their success. We
Hmm.
spend a lot of internal meetings talking about our members and kind of sympathizing and empathizing with their problems and like working together as a PSC team to think about like how could we support a large brand, or how could we support a small retailer, or how could we bring people together. And just the passion and the care and compassion that each of the PSC team members brings to this work is something I wish that everybody, all the members that we work with, could see. I think that they know because we also feel cared for by them and respected, and we work really well together, but it's really inspiring.
Yeah, there are things that go on in the day to day that just aren't seen, right? But
Yeah.
they're often the glue that holds things together and makes it succeed. When pressures increase, I mean, you mentioned that that one thing you mentioned was that budgetary pressures have increased, right? What's the first thing that tends to break when things like that happen? What goes by the wayside?
Sadly, we're seeing some layoffs happen. I think people lose their jobs. Like if a sustainability person, they might go, which is really a bummer.
Yeah,
Not all the time though. I think a lot of companies are working really hard to like keep their staff and deal with the budget pressures in other ways. I think it is a matter of like data, like going really hard and like spending a lot of money on like really robust greenhouse gas data, or a big materiality assessment is something that might go. I'm trying to think of like what other pressures. I mean, we always talk about consumer pressure, and fortunately that's been pretty constant, or at least there's plenty of data that shows that like people, sustainability is one of the things that they really consider when shopping for pet products. But I know that consumer pressure is something that people keep an eye on and want to be adaptable to. Yeah, we see companies responding in different ways, and that's just part of the adaptability that we offer as
yeah.
an organization as well.
One of the things I talk about a lot is language matters.
Mm,
Right? How you frame things, how you say things, the precision of language matters. When I think about where we started our conversation with you talking about packaging and product, and now just using the word consumer, most of us are not really consumers, are we?
mm,
We're users, right? You're using the packaging, you're not consuming it, right? The pet food is being consumed by the dog or the cat. So, if we can get more precision into our language, I think that would help. Because then when you think about the product side in the pet industry, you clearly want to be very conscious of safety and health. And is this good for the pet, right? I mean, this is literally being consumed.
Hmm.
But when it comes to the packaging, it's being used for transportation and preservation of the quality and freshness and so on. And when you change your language to use, you can begin to contemplate next use. You talked about maybe
Hmm.
upcycling some things or reusing things.
Right.
But I think some of that requires a changing language to help people see how that next cycle might come about.
Right. And actually, I'm sorry, I want to add on to my last answer because I think
Yeah.
some companies that we're working with are feeling extreme pressure and have to respond to it in some of the ways I just mentioned. Other companies are feeling pressure of varying degrees, but many of the companies are also like rising to the occasion and like figuring out how to have just as robust a sustainability strategy to continue their efforts and make it work in other ways. So I think that like we're not really seeing a stepping back or a rolling back of sustainability too much in
Well, I
our.
think that's an important point because you do see. I mean, I don't obsess over social media, but you do see quite a few posts about is sustainability dead? I mean, and have all the companies given up? And I think, to your point, I think most of it's sort of, if anything, it's gone underground a little bit. It's maybe not so visible, but it doesn't mean to say that it's not there. Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a good point. If the viewers and listeners to this episode walk away remembering just one thing about you and the work that you're doing at the coalition, what would you want that to be?
I want it to be that the pet industry can reach PSC's vision, that vision of where every choice for pets supports a thriving planet. I think that we can do it. And I think that like we need businesses, we need governments, we need individual action. Like we need all three of these positive forces working together, but just that like everyone has a role to play in that and the pet industry has an impact. So let's make it better. Let's make it a positive one.
And you mentioned about your personal relationship with your cat, right? And I mentioned, I've been a dog person my whole life. I think I probably had six, at least six dogs in my life. Where do you see the each of us individually as pet owners in this matrix? It's one thing to get the coalition together of the willing pet companies.
Yeah.
How do we work on our own individual selves in this? Because you said you had a revelation yourself about, oh my goodness, I hadn't really thought about this for my own pet.
Sure. Yeah. I think the welfare of a pet has to come first before we start talking about like switching to sustainable products or switching behaviors. I think that the well-being of any animals that we have, any pets that we own really matters. And so making sure that they are getting proper nutrition, that they are getting proper stimulation, that they're living a happy pet life is really important. And that is relevant because like my cat just won't eat some food, even if it's the most sustainable food. However, I've defined that for myself, like she won't eat it. And so it's not an option. And so I think like I give myself some grace and I do my best. So I think that that's something I encourage everyone to do is like remember that like you being a responsible pet owner comes first. And then the second thing beyond that is just approaching your ownership of your pet with curiosity and asking questions about what might have a more positive impact. It could be going into your pet store and asking the shop owner there, like, hey, do you have a section of sustainable products? Or do you have any recommendations about like certifications I should look for on pack or something like that? So just taking maybe like a minute to consider either product switches or some sort of practice that might invite your pet into a sustainable lifestyle with you.
No, I agree completely with that. I mean, I think one of the most powerful things that each of us has as an individual is our discretionary spending. And to those who are at the lower end of the action in your coalition, we talked about how to bring them up. One of the ways is for them to hear from their customers, right? To say, hey, what are you doing on sustainability? And if you don't give me a good enough answer, I may well switch. So I think there's definitely pressure that can be made, not only at the retail level, but on social media, right? I'm sure all the companies have their social media platform out there, and and it's an easy place to send messages. When you look forward just in the relatively near future, what do you see is going to change in the next 12 to 24 months that might give you some more of that hope and optimism that you say you still have? And I agree with it. I'm still completely optimistic, even though we also have to be realistic at the same time.
Yeah. I think that there is going to be significant improvement to packaging. This is in part really obviously driven by extended producer responsibility or EPR laws. This is just like a fee per pound of packaging law that is causing a lot of companies, any company that has any sort of packaged good is like really considering like, okay, how do I minimize these fees? What packaging do I need to switch to? So that is an example of a law that has the potential to drive real change. We're also specific to that, also working with a small group of companies to launch a store drop-off recycling program for flexible pet food packaging. So we're still in the design phase of that initiative, but just giving folks an option for a place to recycle their pet food packaging is something that I'm really excited for the pet industry coming soon. I really predict that there's going to be advancements both in that mandatory side of action. I think there are going to be laws that keep popping up that require companies to do better for their reporting and their progress. But I also really see that the leaders in this space, the ones on the voluntary side that already get it, I think that they're going to push the needle even further and continue to lift that ceiling through their innovation, which there's so many different innovative ideas, and I'm excited to see which ones come to market.
Well, it sounds like you're trying to fill some of the gaps in the circular economy. I've been talking about circularity for more than 20 years. Long before it had the name circular economy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the problems is, you identified it right there, that there's a great way for us to get products to us. We can all do it just from our smartphones now, and it's dropped off at us the next day or two. But there's no way to reaggregate all the things that came along with it, like the packaging, once they're used and they've fulfilled their function. So this reaggregation, how we get all of those individual items of packaging back to a place where there's sufficient volume that they can be handled economically and safely, right? That's one of the big challenges. I look forward to hearing more about that project as it takes form.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you spending time with us today, and good luck with those projects as you take them into the next couple of years.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, just let me hit the stop button here. I'm your host, Ken Alston.